Just as a quick introduction, Catchpoint is it's a digital experience monitoring company. So I've worked at Catchpoint for January will be my 5th year. I worked in a multitude of different roles in Catchpoint, but most recently here, I'm focused on leading our business team for the employee experience monitoring offer that we have. But just to give you a little bit more background for those of you who aren't aware of Catchpoint, I know we're not the biggest name on the panel today, but what we've done, and we launched back around 2010, is looking at helping people understand how their users are experiencing digital services that they care about, and helping them understand, more importantly, all the pieces of the puzzle that we all know can affect that ultimate experience of them, being able to log on and use an application, let's say. So when we first started, we were really laser focused on consumer or customer experience. So if you think about someone going to buy something on Amazon.com, Target, Walmart, an e-commerce site, media site, helping make sure that people could do that and offering proactive monitoring and how those things are performing. But as you can imagine, if things have evolved, and this is something that I'm going to really touch on in my talk today, is around the 2015-2016 timeframe, we started to see that digital transformation really impact not only the delivery chain for customers and external experiences, but also for internal employees. And so, moving to things like SaaS-based applications such as O365, virtual desktops, all the fun stuff that we're talking about today, it was kind of started to see that hit, and people started to see a real gap in the ability to monitor and make sure that those things were working. And so there was a really natural shift for us to help expand what we're doing for our customers and applying that same user backwards approach of monitoring to the employees as well. And so in 2016, it was kind of the first use case we had for that. It was actually Priceline.com helping to monitor their call center employees and making sure that those people could use the applications and the networks were working appropriately within those locations. And so that was kind of the first foray for us into taking that methodology into the enterprise and the employee experience, as I'll say. And then the most recent evolution of Catchpoint, and where we've really doubled down our business in helping that side, is, as you can imagine, with COVID and forcing people to go to a remote first or a hybrid type workforce, what we've noticed is this has really skyrocketed in importance, is because, as you can imagine, the complexities of working from home and all the pieces of the puzzles that could potentially cause an issue for someone having a call like we're having today really go through the roof. And so Catchpoint has really invested in this and helping people monitor those things appropriately. And we've also come up with some new technologies to help get even closer to the end user, monitoring actually even down to the laptop itself and working backwards. And so that's just a brief history of what we do, where we've come and how we've come to be. And so what I'll walk you through today is first a little bit of the problem and how we help, but then what I want to spend the most of the time on really is diving into a specific example of, I think, a really common issue that probably many of the people here today have experienced or could relate to, and how we were able to help, or how a solution like ours was able to help with them. And so to kind of set the stage, I hinted and alluded to the complexities of today's environment forced by work from home and digital transformation. And we did a survey that recently actually came out that 80% of IT issues related to employee experience are now actually outside of the control of enterprise IT. And so it's not that much of a surprise, frankly. You can imagine how much is being invested in, cloud and remote desktops and SaaS applications and all these fun things. And so there's a huge investment and shift to outsourcing all of these components. But what happens is the monitoring tools that people had in place to kind of control and understand and make sure that these things are working as they see fit, while they're no longer in their control, the monitoring tools have not shifted with them to be able to understand all these new complexities, that at the end of the day, you're still responsible for making sure it all works together for your end users, which are your employees, to be able to do their job. I see this from a Gartner conference I was at a few years ago, and it was actually from an Amazon speaker talking about how even if you're hosted on AWS, and AWS may be the problem, your users don't necessarily know what you're being hosted on, what CDN you have in place, what virtual desktop you're using. All they care about is being able to do their job, to join the meeting when they want to. And regardless of these things being outside of your control, it still falls on your responsibility to make sure that they're all working appropriately. And if I could sum that up, that's really what Catchpoint looks to do, is help enterprise IT folks be able to provide that type of visibility and ultimately a better experience for their employees. And so this just talks about and expands about what I mean by that shift. And so if you think about it, these are kind of the core components or delivery chain perspectives of things that need to happen appropriately for someone to be able to do their job and to use services. And so if you think about the shift in these, you have your endpoints to your laptops. So much hasn't changed with them, but you introduced the idea of a virtual desktop or a desktop as a service. Your networks, obviously everyone working remote now, introducing the idea of third-party home office networks, data centers going to the cloud, and all of your in-house apps, majority of them going to third-party SaaS applications. And then, again, as I mentioned before, all this leads to things that are outside of your control. And so this is what we kind of view, again, what this new delivery chain looks like for most people. And obviously there's going to be all kinds of variations, and it's constantly changing. And the great thing about our approach, or the way we feel is I'll say the correct way to look at monitoring something of this complexity that's constantly changing, is that rather than taking what maybe I'll call a traditional approach of monitoring each individual component by itself to make sure that it's working, is to actually start with the end user itself, because at the end of the day, that's the whole point, is to make sure that they can do it. You know, you've invested in a virtual desktop or SaaS applications or cloud migration to make sure that people can do their jobs well. And so what we always say, and if there's one thing I want you all to take away from this, is that in an environment that's this complex, having the ability to look from the end user itself and work backwards to understand how all those needles in the haystack are working together, and if there is a bottleneck, being able to quickly identify which piece of the puzzle it is, it's really, really important in this ever-changing landscape. And it's the one kind of surefire way to know that no matter what changes are happening, no matter what's going on in the world, you're going to be able to see how it's impacting your end users. And so that's what we really focus on in providing kind of a unbiased view into that. And so, like I said, we always like to say we give an independent third-party view into the black box of your modern digital enterprise. And so yesterday is a great example. You know, obviously Amazon had a bit of an outage yesterday that people were affected by massively. But that's going to happen. It's not a knock on Amazon. It's a terrific provider that so many people use. But we've seen so many of those things over the past year and a half, whether it's Amazon, whether it's Fastly, whether it's Microsoft. Everyone is going to have a down day and things that are going to impact your performance. And that's why, again, it's really important to have something like Catchpoint or an unbiased tool that doesn't rely on those services to be able to help you understand that when those things do go wrong, how do we understand in a moment's notice what it is we need to do to be able to rectify the solution and make sure that we can properly identify, let our employees know, and get things back up running as fast as possible. And so to dig into my example that we wanted to talk about here, it's a Fortune 150 company. It's a manufacturing company that employs roughly 60,000 employees around the world. As you can imagine, they were also affected by remote work. They had tons of remote offices and regions that salespeople as well as manufacturing consultants had to be working from home networks all around the globe. And so, as you can imagine, Salesforce, one of the most common applications used by most companies, is one that they rely on very heavily, especially for those remote workers. And when they went to this remote shift, obviously the idea of introducing new networks, they introduced remote desktop, and all these other components that I was just speaking on led to a lot of problems. And at the end of the day, what it led to was 800 angry users of Salesforce across the US that from all ordering departments and distributors It actually ended up getting escalated to the board because it was lasting so long. And so this is exactly the scenario that we want to avoid. And if we look at just how bad the impact was, and I'm sure many of you have had the same thing with incidents like this that are really hard to identify, but they had 15 to 20 people who were across incident management, network, end user computing, app developers, as well as the Salesforce.com team, trying to figure this out over a 3-month period. And one of the reasons it was so hard for them to understand what was going on is that their issues were sporadic. There's no real patterns that they could identify within the tooling they had, because they were looking at specific points of the puzzle, and they had real no way to look at, from each individual user backwards, how everything was working together. And so it took a very, very long time for them to really start understanding what was going wrong, all while the incidents continued to happen and were affecting their business and their end users. And so what Catchpoint was able to do is work with their enterprise monitoring leader, who provides monitoring as a service to all the company, including tools like Splunk and AppDynamics and Dynatrace. But now layering in Catchpoint on top of those point solutions to be able to implement. And it took about 3 weeks to get packaged and approved by security and all the fun stuff to get deployed out. But once it was deployed, it only took a couple hours for them to identify that there was connectivity issues in the specific ISPs, and they were able to specifically identify which ISPs those were and which users were being affected by them, and raise tickets with those individual providers to get those things resolved. And so obviously the business impact of that is rather significant. And if you look at the calculations of looking at 15 people over 3 months versus one person over significantly less time, you're looking at something around the lines of 64 times faster resolution time, which is a huge impact, obviously, from an FTE perspective. But what I like to point out here, obviously, is if you think about the business impact of this, is whether it's customer facing or whether it's people who are critical to the business to provide something that's revenue generating, them not being able to do their job not only has an impact on the revenue, but on the brand itself. And so those are the types of things that, by providing that visibility to enterprise IT to minimize the impact these types of incidents are having on their workforce, really start to add up as you go over a year's time frame and the number of applications and complexities that you have. And so that's really what Catchpoint looks to do, to be able to help companies sleep better at night, knowing that if there is something going wrong, they're going to know about it and know what to do about it very quickly.